till at least 9:30, 10 in the night, the previous day prior to surgery, doing all the planning. And we had a joke in during the fellowship that there are 3 stages of pre-construction. Dr. Paley talks about pre-constructing a frame. Some people put on the frame on the table, but we used to pre-construct. So we had a joke which said you have to do 3 stages. One is pre-construct, then second is deconstruct, and third is reconstruct. That means we would make the frame, go and show it to Dr. Paley, and he would say, no, change this. We would go back, change it, and then the frame would come on table in that fashion. And again on table, he will probably make some changes. So for every patient, we were constantly working with our hands and not just theory. That helped me hell of a lot. So I think, and finally with Dr. Ranawat, I did a fellowship with him and learned a lot of orthopedic stuff as well as non-orthopedic stuff by being exposed. So these people, I think, are the people that I sort of am very, very grateful to for teaching me everything that I know.
So there were 4 of them, sir.
Yes.
That's good. So I would like to ask you, sir, what is your philosophy of life at present?
Philosophy at present. Yeah, it keeps changing, but I think now for a pretty long time, the philosophy I have is one, all people are good. There is no bad person. When I was younger, I used to think that I am a superior being, but very soon that got changed. And I believe now that, all people are good. You have to sort of bring out the goodness. If we talk about students, if we talk about colleagues, very easy to think about the negative side. But if you start looking at the positive side, you can always find some. The other thing is the other most important, I think, which to me is a reason for me remaining cutting edge, is teaching. Because whenever I'm teaching, whenever I'm talking to not only students, even other orthopedic surgeons, if I'm talking to a bunch of 50 orthopedic surgeons, these are people who have got into orthopedics by being top of the line. They were the cream of the cream in college. They were the cream of the cream in medical school, and then they got into orthopedics. Now, if I have to stand in front of them and convince them and tell them something, I cannot bullshit them because they will catch it immediately. So if I have to talk to them properly, my own basics have to be right. So constantly teaching, constantly, doing talks and things like that has helped me to understand a lot of things also, so that I can explain it in a better manner. So those 2, I think, are my guiding philosophies, where sharing is never taking away from me. When I share, I actually gain back much more.
That is the right thing, sir. शुरू से कहा जाता है विद्या देने से और बढ़ती है.
Exactly. It increases by sharing.
Sir, any hobbies of yourself? Would you like to share any hobbies?
Hobbies, right now, the main hobby I have is photography. I go on, now with this last 1 year, I haven't gone anywhere, but I am an amateur photographer. I love photography, especially wildlife. So I like to go, I've been to Uttarakhand also. Vimal knows that. Vimal has taken me around actually. So that's something I love. Being out in nature and photographing that is the other thing apart from orthopedics, which I enjoy.
Nice, very good hobby, sir. Very good. Learning and seeing bird watching is also there. in this
Bird
note.
watching is also there. It's all a part of that. मतलब ऐसा specifically कोई ये नहीं. All of nature includes birds and forests and all of it.
So, sir, before starting the academic, the last question: what will be your message to the younger generation of orthopedics? Though they have got many things from your life story, but any specific message for the younger ones?
Specific message, I think one is you have to build a strong base. I always tell, I have students at JJ Hospital where I'm a honorary professor. So I keep telling them, you can't decide to be an arthroscopic surgeon, you know, when you have finished your MS orthopedics. After MS, you need to work for a couple of years in general orthopedics, and then you can start specializing. Because if you don't have a sound base, you will never be able to go really high. And the second thing is, you should be your strongest tree. Oftentimes what happens, we do a surgery and then we say, oh, नहीं ये ठीक है, ये पेशेंट का बोन वीक था, ये ऐसा था, वो रिजेक्ट कर दिया, पेशेंट के पास पैसा नहीं था. Those are all excuses. So you should be able to pick out that, yes, this is the mistake I made. And once you make that mistake, you should not make that same mistake the second time. If you do a reasoning as to, okay, why did this happen? It was either you didn't order the implant or you didn't plan or something. That same mistake should not happen again. Yes, I mean, I also make mistakes even today, but it's usually not the same mistake which I have made once before. So that's if I have to say it in one line, you should be your strongest critic.
Thanks, sir, for the insight. I would request you to share your screen and start.
Sir,
your
if you
topic.
allow, can I ask one little question to him? If you
Why
allow.
not?
Yes, Sanjay.
If I am not wrong, your father was a great surgeon.
My father was a physician.
Not from your branch, and he was very
No,
famous.
he was
out
not
there.
from.
What made you to change your fraternity in orthopedics? Because you have a very strong background. People usually tend to go. This will be, I think, it will be useful, because changing from a well settled part to another branch where you have to struggle a lot. So what was that? Why you took that decision? What made you?
Well, actually, I think to a certain extent, he only would have pushed me a little. My father used to be a CMO at Bombay Hospital before he started private practice. And he was very impressed with Dr. K.T. Dholakia. If you hear Dr. K.T. Dholakia's stories, you will know how, you know, people would keep doors open for him and things like that. So somewhere he said that you should become like Dholakia. But basically, I enjoyed orthopedics. Though, to be truthful, I didn't realize the depth of orthopedics till I got into orthopedics. You know, but I was always interested in a surgical branch. That I was clear. So it could have been general surgery. Initially, I had a sort of dream of doing general surgery and then doing orthopedics. But by the time I came to PG, the rules were changing so fast that I was worried कि साला जनरल सर्जरी कर लेंगे और फिर रूल चेंज हो जाएगा, फिर ऑर्थो मिलेगा ही नहीं, तो फिर बच जाएगी. So then I took up orthopedics.
Yeah, Dr. Mangal, like Dr. Sanjay's son and my son both were intern last year, and we could not convince our sons and made more interns that why should we take orthopedics from the other surgical branches like surgery and ENT and whatever it is.
Okay.
Why should we take orthopedics? We could not convince them. Can you give some, like a lot of interns working under you, if they ask which surgical branch should I go, sir, how to say that orthopedic has some superiority over the other surgery like neurosurgery, cardiothoracic surgery, or neurosurgery? How to
I
convince them?
don't know. I mean, I'm not so sure that orthopedics is necessarily superior to them. I mean, if I have a bad neurological problem, I hope there will be a good neurosurgeon who can operate on me. So certainly, if they are very clear that they enjoy a particular branch or they like a particular branch, then I think they should go for that branch. One thing we can do is show them what orthopedics is by getting them into our OTs and OPDs and stuff, where hopefully they can see what fun orthopedics is, because ultimately we have to live our whole life in that particular branch. So if somebody is enjoying his work, then it's not work at all, and that's what it is for me for orthopedics. So I think I would not try to convince them that okay, this is necessarily better. If they are confused, okay, ये लेना है कि ये लेना है कि ये, then आओ 2 महीना हमारे साथ में ओपीडी में आओ, बैठो ओटी में स्क्रब करो, then you will get an idea.
Yeah, that is the best way to go to different branches, do some hands-on, and then you decide yourself.
Yeah, and then you actually realize as to okay, what is there in it.
I think that is the concept behind internship and rotation of all these branches, and then they can decide their own.
Yeah, and now so they don't even probably get right away with the NEET and all that. So they have that way time to spend even after the internship.
So, sir, you are sharing your screen, sir?
I am sharing it, sir,
Okay.
Okay, so I do this talk in various forms multiple times, and over time this talk has expanded. Earlier it used to be only about tibial osteotomies, and now I want to bring, I think tibial osteotomies most people know about, they are fairly convinced about. So I want to kind of talk about what are the different types of osteotomies you can do, when you can do them, and how. I will probably not speak so much about how, because for each particular osteotomy, it's well documented now with all these webinars going on with YouTube and all that. We have enough technique videos and things like that. So we'll probably stick to more of what and when. And as I was talking to Dr. Sirohi, that if we have questions, that is fantastic, because that's the best way of sharing stuff. So should we do it in the tibia? Should we do it in the femur? Many a times nowadays we do it in both. Should you do an open wedge or a closed wedge? When should you do an osteotomy? When only osteoarthritis is there, or we do it for a deformity also? And again, closing wedge, open wedge, can you use a nail? Can you use a plate? Can you use a fixator? And I think all of them are valid in particular situations. So now, can it be done in this knee, which conventionally speaking, most of us who don't have experience with osteotomy, most juniors who have not seen their bosses doing osteotomy, will see contraindications to osteotomy in this. They will see bone on bone, which they think is a contraindication. They will see subluxation of the knee, which again they think is a contraindication. So, but this patient is 36 years old. So this is far away from the age of any kind of arthroplasty. And if something is not done now, this is only going to get worse. So a lot of my learning has come from patients like this, where we've done it because there was no other option. And we found that, oh, they're doing very well. So the second time that we had to see a patient like this, we were much more confident in terms of talking about it. So the indications for these various osteotomies are predominantly one side affectation, that is a medial compartment or a lateral compartment, which basically is that the alignment is not right. So one side is getting overloaded, and therefore that side is wearing out. So the commonest, of course, is medial compartment. Lateral compartment is also there, but not as common as medial compartment. So they point particularly to the medial joint line. It's not a vague pain, ki pura ghutna dard. If you ask them, on the medial side of the knee, does it hurt? They say yes. And if you press there, it hurts. It's not on the posterior aspect of the knee, it's right on the medial joint line. They should have a good range of motion, because this is not an inflammatory situation, or this is not a pan arthritis. So they will have a good range of motion. Minimal or no flexion deformity. I'll come to that in subsequent slides. And of course, the patient has had adequate conservative care in the form of physiotherapy. I don't believe in injections. I don't believe in steroids. I don't believe in stuff like collagen. That's all, what do you call that? Mysterious medicine. None of those things work. This, according to me, when the alignment is wrong, it's a purely mechanical problem, and the solution is also mechanical. So everyone says, if you ask any postgraduate student, what is the indication for a high tibial osteotomy, they will say monocompartmental osteotomy, monocompartmental osteoarthritis. Now, what is this monocompartmental osteoarthritis? There is really, no such thing as monocompartmental osteoarthritis, because even in this patient, you see there is a lateral osteophyte. Subluxation is supposed to be a contraindication. Bone on bone is supposed to be a contraindication, and obesity. All of these patients we have treated multiple with good results. And if you look at the literature also, none of these now today in the hands of people who are doing osteotomy regularly, none of them have any contraindications as far as these things go, because they get corrected. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So the other question is, I showed you a 36-year-old, and the other question is a 60-year-old. So this is a 60-year-old, and 60 years old now in metro cities is 10 years beyond the age of total knee replacement, right? So in 60 years old, how can you do a osteotomy is the question that many people wonder, because, at 60 years, knee replacement only. But according to me, if there is isolated medial compartment, the lateral compartment is fine. If there's isolated medial compartment, then there is no reason to not offer an osteotomy to this patient. So this was this is years before, before we had started with the orthofix type, the unilateral. So we used to use the Ilicerov at that time so that we get an accurate correction. So this lady had an osteotomy by the Ilicerov. It's a very simple fixator. There's a couple of wires and two pins, a wire and a pin, and one Schanz pin over here. So it's not a very complicated one. And here she is at 75 years of age, 15 years post-operative. Okay. The X-ray may look okay, that the medial side is still worn, but she's now loading the lateral side. And if you look at her, scores, the KOOS score 98, 48, 48 is normal Oxford knee score. IKDC 92. These two, KOOS and IKDC 100 is normal. And pre-operatively, they were significantly affected. After this, despite she had a fracture IT also in between. Luckily, that surgeon has fixed it completely anatomically. So her axis continues to be maintained. What we say should be somewhere around the lateral tibial spine. So she's there and she continues to do well. So this was about, I think, year and a half back, this picture and the score. The 36-year-old also, the moment she has an osteotomy, notice that the subluxation is gone. The apparent bone on bone is gone. Now she's loading on the lateral side. And if you look at papers by a surgeon called Koshino, who's a Japanese surgeon, he has shown that the cartilage on the medial side grows back. It's not hyaline cartilage, but it's a high quality fibrocartilage. So to the question that does cartilage grow back? Yes, the answer is cartilage does grow back, but it's a high quality fibrocartilage. The important thing is the accuracy of correction. If you get your correction accurate, then you are able to get this well corrected. So this is a standing X-ray, no subluxation, joint space restores. It takes about a year or so to get this restored. So rather than one indication, I say it's a spectrum of indications. In younger ages, there will be more damaged knees where it will be acceptable to do a osteotomy. Older ages, in spite of the fact that, I showed you a 60-year-old, but very older ages, a 60-year-old is active. So that's not what I would call old, but old people, you would need to consider healing issues also. So there, in some situations, an arthroplasty may be okay. Whenever I have a patient who has an active lifestyle, whose general health is good and is more from a rural background, I would be biased towards a high tibial osteotomy or some form of an osteotomy. Now, I am not trying to sell osteotomy as the poor man's knee replacement. The patient Garib cannot afford, that is not to be done. I mean, for that patient, you don't do a osteotomy. If you have significant damage and an old patient, that patient needs a knee replacement, you do a knee replacement. Now even public hospitals have that. So that is something which should be done. The next question which comes up is which method? Should we do a closing wedge, which is what has been talked about and taught for so long? Should we do an open wedge with various techniques, the Tomofix plate, the Fudu plate, and there are newer plates which are available. What I do 80% of the time is with an orthofix, and I'll tell you later why I prefer to use this. So this is a fixator which has two proximal pins, two distal pins. There is a self-aligning clamp in the middle so that when the angle between the pins changes, this fixator is able to adjust it, right? And inbuilt into that is a distractor. So this operative technique, I'm not going to go into detail because this is available on YouTube for anyone who's interested. But essentially what we do is we put on the pins on the intact bone, 2 pins proximal, 2 pins distal, and then do an osteotomy distal to the tuberosity. The tuberosity is somewhere here. And the reason for that is if you do it distal, you are not affecting the patellar height. So if you have heard the AO way of doing it, when large corrections are required, the biplanar osteotomy is done not towards the proximal side, it's done towards the distal side. Because if you do large corrections with the standard osteotomy, you will tighten up the patellar ligament and increase the patellar pressure.
Sir,
so same thing, when we go distal to the tuberosity, we are not increasing increasing the patellofemoral contact pressure, right? Whereas a proximal to the tuberosity will do that. So we are doing the osteotomy distal, but aiming towards the tip of the fibula. So in Elizarov, we talk about the cora. So you have a proximal axis and you have a distal axis, usually that intersects somewhere in this region, around the region of the, around the level of the tip of the fibula. And we leave this hinge intact, right? So this is the difference between what I do, the red line on the AP and lateral, and what the AO osteotomy is. The direction is similar, except that the AO talks about a biplanar so that the tuberosity comes with the distal fragment. I do it distally so that the tuberosity is with the proximal fragment. And once I've done that, I have a osteotomy which is complete enough that it allows correction like this, and it is incomplete enough in the sense that the lateral hinge is there so that this is a very stable system. So when the patient comes out of the theater, the leg is as bored, as much in varus as before. He has the distractor on, and after 7 days, we start distraction. So with a little distraction, it's now come to about 90, and each patient requires a certain amount depending on how much varus there is, and more it goes into valgus. Now you notice all of this movement is happening around this lateral hinge. And because we do this gradually, 1 millimeter per day, following the principles of Ilizarov, this will form bone in this gap. There's no need for bone grafting. And by 3 months, this is well healed, fixator can come off. Now, the important thing here is, what is this so-called adequate valgus? This is the place where most people fail, or the results which are not so good happen when the correction is not adequate. So there are two things we look at. One is the HKA, the hip, knee, and ankle angle, which is measured on the medial side. And this should be between 183 to 186 degrees. So it's a very narrow range of 3 degrees, right? 180 would be a straight, this thing, and you want 183 to 186. And the reason for that is, even when you are straight, you are still bearing 70% of the load on the medial side. So if you want to even make it 50-50, you have to go a little at least onto the lateral side. And the second one is that the weight bearing axis should pass through the Fujisawa point, which is somewhere between 30 to 40% of the width of the lateral tibial plateau. To make it simple, it is essentially the base of the lateral tibial spine, right? So both of these factors, if they are satisfied, that is an adequate valgus. In case of valgus to varus correction, say for lateral compartment arthritis, there we aim for a 180 degrees, because as I told you, even when it's 180, you are 70% load is on the medial side. So you have already unloaded the lateral side. So here is a bunch of X-rays which you see from left to right. The first one is the pre-op, second at 2 weeks, then at 3 weeks, then at 4 weeks. So usually when I tell patients to correct, I give them 4 or 5 extra days, because then they will come a little overcorrected. When they come to the clinic, I can reduce it to exactly what is needed. So here a patient came at 4 weeks overcorrected. We reduced the distraction by 2 mm to get this thing at the spine. So patient comes, sees the X-ray, the compression can be done acutely, but distraction has to be done at 1 mm per day. So once this is done, the fixator is locked and patient is full weight bearing. Now, there is no evidence which favors any particular technique. So if someone tells me that I have been doing closed wedge osteotomy for, donkey's years and my results are very good, I will believe it. But there is a reason why we do opening wedge now, is at some point or the other, you may require a knee replacement. So there we don't want to alter the anatomy of the tibia. If you do closing wedge in large corrections, there is something known as truncation that happens. So that's the reason I use a opening wedge, and the fixator is because of the adjustability. So there is no doubt in this at all. Starting from 1987, they have looked at 13 years follow-up. Now in 1987, if they had a 13-year follow-up, the osteotomies have been done in 75. So think about what was the technology available in 1975 for fixing osteotomies and fractures: staples, wires, that's it. Despite that, what they found is when the angles were right, the results were excellent. Even Coventry's own article of 93 looked at the 87 cases who did well, and they had a good correction. So the problem earlier was we didn't have a good enough way to hold it. So HTO is a good option for MCOA, and go forward from there. But the point now, with more knowledge, is that the tibia is not the only culprit, and sometimes HTO is not the only thing that is needed. Meaning it's not the answer to every MCOA. There are other things also, right? So in the normal 40 to 55, or as I said, 60, 65, who's biologically young, with varus, medial joint pain, not relieved by conservative treatment, there you can do an osteotomy. But the problem is not only in the proximal tibia. It can be in the distal femur. Your distal femur, I'll show you a few x-rays now which are in varus. It can be in the lateral ligaments which are lax because of a long-standing distraction sort of the lateral side. It could be a combination of tibia, femur, and lateral ligament. And it's not just the coronal plane. You can have flexion or recurvatum deformities. So these are the four main things that you should watch out for in terms of osteoarthritis: distal femur varus, ligament laxity, flexion deformity, and joint line deformity, which is now getting more and more known. You should not rely only on spot films to calculate, because earlier we used to draw the femoral axis and the tibial axis and then see what is the angle, and according to that add over correction. That's not a good way. For planning, you should have a full length, because as you see in this, there is a significant femoral bow here. So if you just look at this portion and correct, you will not get the right correction. So that means either you have to do more over correction, or you have to correct whatever deformity is there in the femur. Like in this case, I would probably do a nailing to get this straight and then do a HTO at the proximal tibia. Now I said, you know, the lateral x-rays, I have some more slides later on. I'll come to that in a bit. The important thing is this LDFA, what we call in Ilizarov terminology as lateral distal femoral angle. Normally this is 87, 88. If it's more than 90, especially if there is a varus thrust, then you should consider a closing wedge distal femoral osteotomy. So this is an orthopedic surgeon himself. Okay, you can see his knees, osteoarthritic. He's 57 years old, pain in both the knees, not able to stand for any regular long surgery, which most of us do. And if you look at his angle, you will find that his lateral distal femoral angle, which normally is between 85 to 90, is 93. And the MPTA is also less, 82, which is normally 85 to 90. So before our knowledge of all these angles and the importance of the obliquity of the joint line, this would have been treated with just a high tibial osteotomy. And I've done some before. But now, especially when they have this lateral thrust, every step he takes, his varus is getting more. It's not only what you see on the static film. He's loading that leg in more varus with the step. So if you do only a tibial correction, what will happen is you will have to overcorrect the tibia and you will get an oblique joint line like this. And that oblique joint line leads to shear forces. You see here, despite all the varas, the joint is still parallel to the ground. And that is an important relationship, which we have sort of come to know later. So if you don't do the femoral osteotomy and just try to overcorrect on the tibia, the joint line becomes oblique. And that itself can be a cause for progression of the osteoarthritis. So compare the joint line on this side and compare the joint line on this side, where I have simulated a correction of the femur by 5 degrees and a correction in the tibia, both. So as a surgeon or as a patient, we think that, array, एक osteotomy se kar denge, why should we do 2 osteotomies? But this DFO is a really, closing wedge is a fairly benign procedure in terms of return to function and healing and things like that. So there, I think it helps the patient to have both a distal as well as a distal femur as well as a proximal tibial osteotomy and normalize both. It's a fairly straightforward procedure. You take out a wedge usually somewhere between 5, 6, 7 degrees, because you just need to get it into the normal range. You mark it out with wires. If we have time and if there are particular questions related to that, I have some slides for the thing which I can share. But there's enough available about this. So you do a closing wedge. This is an inherently stable situation. Confirm that the alignment is correct by use of the alignment rod from center of head to center of knee and the joint line. So now we've corrected this to 86, which was 93 earlier. It's only a 7-degree correction, but it's an important correction. And distally, I use an opening wedge with a fixator. Why? Because I can adjust it infinitely to absolute perfection, right? I can get the angle exactly where I want it. And even if there is a little bit of plus minus in the distal femoral osteotomy, I can counter it by using this. So that is post-operative X-ray. This is 4th post-op day. Of course, not every patient goes outside to the this thing and has chai. He was exceptionally motivated person. 7th post-operative day, he's back doing small cases. He had a big team, so he would be doing it sitting down, but he was already working. At the end of distraction, we've got the angle that we want, that is 183 to 186 measured here. We've got the weight-bearing line on the lateral edge of the tibial spine, and as you can see, his the joint line is parallel to the ground, or it's horizontal. So with the fixator on, he was pretty active. At 3 months, his fixator has been taken off. And now if you see that varus thrust, we've done nothing to the lateral ligament. All we've done is correct the axis so that the weight-bearing line goes on the lateral tibial spine. So if your correction is perfect, there's nothing to be done on the lateral side. Then we did his opposite side also, with which again he was active, and he was obviously convinced about this. So he has started doing the same osteotomy himself, keeps sending me very nice messages. So this is quite a lot for a person who couldn't stand for the duration of a surgery. He's doing 6 kilometers trekking in the hilly regions. That's a good result. So for me, even 5 degrees, I have a very low threshold for a distal femur osteotomy, because it avoids unnecessary overcorrection on the tibia and avoids an oblique joint line. Now you come to a flexion deformity. When you do a lateral, I always do, most people don't do this, a lateral in maximum extension. And the reason is, if the patient doesn't have full extension, then you need to correct that extension. So you can see here, what I've marked in green, this is full extension. Here there is a mild flexion deformity, and here there is a significant flexion deformity along with some amount of posterior subluxation. So this kind of case, at least in the early days, you probably should wonder whether I need to do it or not, because these are the ones which can lead you into trouble. So the flexion deformity should be corrected by decreasing the posterior slope. Obviously, you can't do this more than 10 degrees, because then you will get a reverse slope, which is not a good thing. And whenever there is a flexion deformity, I cannot do it with the orthofix, because the orthofix relies on an intact lateral hinge. To correct the slope, you have to break that lateral hinge. So when there is a flexion deformity, I will either use a Tomofix, which is usual, or rarely the Ilizarov when there is a rotational deformity also. So here's a patient with bilateral varus alignment, 170 and 174. But look at the lateral X-rays. So she had a right-sided 15-degree flexion deformity, which with therapy improved to 10. On the left side, she had a 6-degree deformity. So this is not a patient where I'm going to do the correction with orthofix, because I have to correct the flexion deformity also. So this is standard technique. I think everybody by now knows about how the osteotomy is done. But here, what is important is not only the AP. In this case, you have to look at the lateral and the slope of the tibia, which is normally around 80 degrees, or what we call in Ilizarov terminology, PPTA, proximal posterior tibial angle, is now changed to 90. So that flexion deformity of 90 has now been corrected. The tibia is in line with the shaft of the femur. So that slope has to be changed, and that's her final alignment. You can see her flexion is corrected, and in terms of the radiology, it's good. Then we did the same thing on the left side also. Now is another important thing which a lot of people miss. This guy is a 51-year-old banker, and he actually came complaining more of limping than of pain, and that had increased since the last 6 months. Now, if you notice here, this is a standing X-ray, fairly damaged joint on the standing. But when you do the valgus stress view, notice what happens. The joint opens up and there is space between the medial and the lateral side, right? So here's another patient to illustrate this point better. Normally, your medial and lateral tibial plateaus are kind of parallel to each other. Sometimes due to damage, due to growth arrest, due to a malunited medial tibial fracture, you get the medial plateau and the lateral plateau at different angles to each other. This is what we call a pagoda tibia, because it looks like the roof of a pagoda. Now, these patients will not do well with the osteotomy, because that instability in the knee will remain. So look at the amount of varus thrust he has, and look at his full length X-ray. When he's standing, see the amount of subluxation, right? And this guy is 51 years old. So, many people would say, but he's not a candidate for a uni either. So many people would think about doing a knee replacement. But for a 51-year-old, in my book, not a candidate for a knee replacement. You see the MRI shows significant osteophytes. The changes, bone marrow edema, cartilage is worn out completely on the medial side, lateral side is okay. So what we do for this is known as a TCVO, transcondylar valgus osteotomy, described by Teramoto and Chiba. These are Japanese surgeons. We first heard about this in Asami in Goa. We also do an open debridement. You notice all his osteophytes are gone. This is through a parapatellar incision. Everything is out. We've done a notchplasty, again in an open fashion. So all the osteophytes are taken out. And then we do this L-shaped osteotomy and spread it open. As we spread it open, that space is taken up. And the stability of the knee is restored. Once you have it open, you put in tricortical graft and a relatively simple plate just to compress everything together, right? This is at 4 months. Now, this guy turned out to get into the appropriate angle. Not everybody gets into the angle, but I'm not worried about that, because in this particular case, it is not the conventional high tibial osteotomy which works, but it is the restoration of stability in the knee by getting both the joint lines parallel to each other. So that's him before. And that's him after. Right now, so the visually, obviously you can make out, but also look at the scores. Okay, as I said, the IKDC and KOOS score 100 is supposed to be normal, and this is just 4 months post-operative, so he's going to get better over time. And the Oxford score 40 to 48 is a normal score where they wouldn't normally say that you need to operate. So his limp has gone, his pain has gone, his scores have improved. Over a period of time, he is going to continue to improve further. So joint line obliquity is something that you should remember. Many a times patients come with ACL deficiency. To me, what is important is what are their symptoms? Is their symptom, are they coming with pain, that is medial compartment OA, or are they coming with instability? These are usually the younger patients who have damaged their ACL, and they come with instability. If there is instability, obviously, then you have to do both ACL reconstruction and a high tibial osteotomy. But in older patients who are complaining of pain and not instability, they only need a high tibial osteotomy. Neither do you need an arthroscopy or cartilage procedure in this degenerative knees. Rarely if there are symptoms of locking, like a loose body and things like that, but in the kind of patient who needs a high tibial osteotomy, rarely will there be stuff like locking, or patient is complaining of a meniscal kind of pain. Just because the MRI shows a posterior horn degenerative root tear is no reason for scoping. And if you look at the literature, it's both ways. Some people do a arthroscopy before, some people don't. I never do a scopy. And this is again been shown, cartilage procedures, in addition to the high tibial osteotomy, like microfracture, mosaic-plasty, all of that. In osteoarthritis, it doesn't work. If you have ACI, may be used in sort of, contained post-traumatic defects kind of thing, but not for osteoarthritis. So along with tibial varus, you need to look at femoral varus, you need to look at ligament laxity, and think not only of the coronal plane, think of the sagittal plane also. Whatever is the method that you want to use closing wedge, perfectly fine. You want to use opening wedge with a Tomofix plate, perfectly fine. Only thing is, you need to execute your plan accurately, whatever is the method that you want to use. Now, a little bit beyond that, when is all of this also not enough? When the patient needs what is conventionally called TKR. Most people think of TKR as total knee replacement. When I talk of a TKR here, I'm talking of total knee realignment. So here's the interesting story of on the upper right, you'll see the dates over there, right? It's in year, month, and day. So she had pain in her left knee since 4 years. She had a arthroscopic partial medial meniscectomy. and joint debridement about 2 years ago, you can see the significant limp and Trendelenburg that she has because of her pain. So she came with medial compartment OA. She had a significant flexion deformity, 20 degrees. Her PPTA was also abnormal with the abnormal LDFA and a normal MPTA actually. So now, going by everything that we talked about, if this patient with a flexion deformity of 20 degrees, she is not really a candidate for an osteotomy. But I think that in these cases, there are large notch osteophytes which seem to be the culprit for a flexion deformity. And this is very important because even if you correct the coronal plane alignment, for a patient, you try walking with your knee in a little bit of flexion, even 10 degrees. It's difficult. You can't walk for long. It's very energy sapping. So the plan was to do an arthroscopy, excise the notch osteophyte, do knee stretching, and try and correct her flexion deformity a little bit. So you can, this is the arthroscopic surgeon doing the notch arthroplasty, the notch plasty. Medial compartment you can see is completely worn. But despite what you see on the X-ray, this notch osteophyte, see the lateral cartilage. Lateral cartilage is very nice. And those of you who have occasion to see knees undergoing TKR, you will find many a time, even in knees which are undergoing TKR, lateral cartilage is not all that badly damaged. So at 1 month, her flexion was a little less, but it was not really much better. So her pain also had not improved, her flexion deformity. So we decided to do an extension and a valgus femoral osteotomy along with a high tibial osteotomy and a joint debridement with excision of all the osteophytes. So that's her planning. And as I said, her femorotibial angle is around 20 degrees. I told you that we can't correct the PPTA more than 10. So that means the remaining 10 we need to correct from the femur. So we did a regular parapatellar approach, did a knee debridement. Here is the tibial osteophytes which we are cutting off. Those are the femoral osteophytes. Then by putting it into flexion, we excise the notch osteophyte, make that free. And we recreate the notch so that we are able to put a finger into it nicely. So this is the Siam picture AP before a notch plasty. And this is after. So this is maximum extension. So it's clear now that the moment that notch is cleared up, we are able to, here, sorry, what's happening here is not wear. It's just overlap of the femur and tibia because of the flexion deformity. The moment you take out the notch, this patient is able to extend the knee. And this is valgus stress after debridement. So it looks pretty good now. The only thing that remains is the lateral, right? So flexion deformity post notch plasty has reduced, if you notice, right? So it's 4 degrees straight away that has reduced. Sorry. So the next step was to go ahead with the DFO. But in addition to the valgus correction, we corrected it into extension, right? So this has been fixed on the distal. Now you notice the plate is slightly anterior. Then we bring the plate back. So when you do that, the distal fragment gets angulated anteriorly. And on the AP, it looks like a regular closing wedge. So now we've got the MAD, with just the femoral osteotomy, we've got the MAD central, but that valgus is inadequate. So we have to go ahead and do the opening wedge tibial osteotomy, where you notice the slope of the tibia here and the slope of the tibia here. This is almost perpendicular to the long axis of the shaft, whereas here it's the normal 80 degrees. So that's the final alignment on table going through the lateral tibial spine. And most important, look at her post-op X-ray. Her knee now, when it is in full extension, her knee is straight. So we've achieved valgus as well as extension. So that's a 1 month follow-up, 1 month range of motion, 2.5 months. She's already walking pretty well. At 1 year, she has no pain. Now, yes, the question is how long will this last? That's something which time will tell. So this is not something that I advocate everybody should do. This is for this patient was a very understanding patient. Her husband is an orthopedic surgeon. So we were able to discuss all the pros and cons. So again, as I said, go for accurate planning, accurate excision. Age is not a bar. Whatever method that you think is going to be useful, right? So for me now, the new TKR is total knee realignment. This is something that we are looking at in more and more patients as we learn more and more. This is not something that I advocate. People who are just starting out with osteotomies should do, but this is certainly for younger patients a possibility. So now if there is, I think we can answer. I have a couple of other things. If we have questions, I will answer those. And then I can show you some, if someone wants to see the technique and stuff, we can talk about that.
Dr. Parihar,
Anji.
am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes.
So all your osteotomies with LRS is below the tuberosity, or sometimes you go above?
No, if it's the orthofix, it's always below the tuberosity because it's done through a very small incision. So you can't do the biplanar. So it has to be distal to the tuberosity. If I'm doing a plate, then it's the standard technique that is described by AO, where you do a biplanar osteotomy and keep the tubercle along with the distal fracture.
So if you're want to correct the slope, then you will go for osteo and correction with that AO plate.
With a tomofix, yeah. Because for that you have to break the good thing in a way about the fixator is it doesn't change the slope because it's so sort of solid. So once you put the pins in a certain way, it won't change the slope. And if there is a flexion deformity, that's a negative thing, because then to correct the flexion deformity, you have to change the slope. So that means you can't use the orthofix kind of fixator. So either you use the tomofix or you use an Ilizarov. Using an Ilizarov for just that is a little bit excessive. You can do it. I don't have a gross objection to it. But if a plate does it well, then that's fine.
So while doing tomofix, Dr. Parihar,
Yeah.
While doing tomofix, what is the tip you can give operatively? What we should be careful about while doing surgery?
I think the biggest problem with the Tomofix which I treat is lateral hinge fracture and non-union. You have to revise the procedure. It's not just doing an oblique osteotomy. Where you start is important. The distance between the top of the plate and that second screw. There are 3 screws and then 1 screw which goes into the proximal fragment. That's about 38 millimeters. So your osteotomy has to start below that. Otherwise, you will get only 3 screws into the proximal fragment. Now, many a times people don't want to lift up our patients are small. So the pes ansirinus comes in the way. So if required, I will actually pull down a little of the pes ansirinus so that I can go a little more distal. That's number 1. Number 2, if you heard Taubli or Lobenhofer speak about it, they give a lot of importance to the biplanar part of the osteotomy. I've had occasions where surgeons have heard about the Tomofix, then done an osteotomy which is not biplanar and used an Indian plate. And they've landed up into all kinds of trouble. The problem is not with the Indian plate. The problem is that the guy who has made the plate has not understood what is the orientation of the screws. What is the strength that is required? So the Tomofix plate is much stronger than any other locking plate which you use on the medial tibia, because this is an opening wedge. Then the biplanar osteotomy, they have shown in their experiments by CT and all that by about 4 to 6 weeks, that biplanar osteotomy starts healing. It provides a lot of stability. So doing that biplanar osteotomy is intrinsic to that technique. How far you go. Now the AO has described that you have to use a saw. I always use a saw. When you use a saw, you are worried that you might injure the posterior structures, because of which some people use an osteotome. Now, if you use an osteotome, you run the risk of shattering. So your osteotomy is not as sort of clean as it should be. Then if you have a lateral hinge fracture, this whole system has kind of gone. So the 2 things I would say is be careful. 1 is revise the technique properly, understand it properly. 2 is be very careful about the lateral hinge. Nowadays, if you see the webinars, etc., there is talk about using a wire, the hinge wire, which is put in from the lateral side, which is said to reduce hinge fractures. But I think that reduces hinge fractures in the hands of people who are regularly doing. For people who are starting out, you should very clearly understand how it is to be done. Maybe for the first, 2-3, assist somebody who is doing it, or call someone who is doing it regularly to help you. It's a fantastic surgery. It's a very nice surgery, but at the same time, it is technically pretty demanding.
So what if you have broken the lateral hinge, then what is to be done operative per se, if you have done it accidentally?
Then you have to fix it. The Tomofix has a system. If it's just a minor sort of crack, like for example, I told you, when I correct the slope, I have to break the lateral hinge, but that's a very, very sort of gentle break. It's not displaced, and it's what we call, it doesn't go into the joint, doesn't go down, it's into the lateral aspect. So the Tomofix has a system where you can put a compression screw and pull the distal fragment towards, so that the lateral hinge closes up. That is one, if you have done it properly. The second thing to do is fix the lateral side also by a screw in that direction. That is coming from above lateral to below medial. And the third thing is put in bone graft into the gap, because the standard or classical tomofix says you can leave it open without a graft, and that's what I do. But if your lateral hinge is unstable, then that open wedge is not a good one. So then it's better to put in a tricortical graft into that gap.
Okay, so is it only the screw will suffice, or we need to plate it from lateral side?
No. So a screw as well as a graft, I think, should be okay. There are people who have described, which is a very nice way of doing it, putting these nitinol staples, but those staples are not available in India. So you could use a couple of standard staples, but if worried, yes, you should put in graft. That's what I would do.
There are a few questions from the delegates.
Haan
Dr. Dinesh Meena is asking, what is your method and ideology to prevent the hinge fracture?
In the fixator, I do it very, very slowly with the osteotome. But in the orthofix, since it's open, I use the saw. I usually go only about 1 centimeter short of the lateral cortex. Always aim for the tip of the fibula. The fixator has one more, I don't know whether, let me see if I can, just one sec. I'll try and look for whether I have I had done recently a video as to how I complete that last portion of the osteotomy. If I find it, I will Let me just share the screen for a moment. Telegram. Are you able to see this video?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So here what I've done basically is I have done most of it, and then I have gently sort of opened it. Now it looks as if I'm putting on a lot of force, but I'm doing a very, very controlled movement over there. I'm using my chest to push against that lateral portion. So I've got the osteotomy completed, the lateral portion. That's how I completed. So that is not completed with osteotome. It's completed kind of manually. So it's a more of a tearing of the hinge rather than the cutting of the hinge.
Sir, what is your protocol if accidentally you facing this problem that the lateral hinge is fractured? What is your post-op protocol you are advising?
I had one patient where after about 15 days or so, the patient, while getting off from bed, fell and impacted his leg. In that patient, what we had to do was we put in a figure of 8, 2 screws, one in the proximal, one in the distal, and a figure of 8 wire on the lateral side. So that formed a hinge, and gave him 7 days of rest, and then gradually distracted again. I've had about 7 or 8 patients at least who have fractured towards the end of distraction. That is not a problem, because what happens is I am distracting the fixator at 1 millimeter per day. So if my fixator is distracting at 1 millimeter per day, which is over here, the medial cortex is distracting at less than 1 millimeter per day. And the lateral cortex is distracting almost nothing. So by 15, 17 days, this side, there is already callus which is formed, and that does not displace. So they remain stable and they don't have a problem. The issue is only if you break it on table or soon after. On table, what I would do is put in a figure of 8 if I'm doing it with a fixator. If it's a Tomofix, then maybe plate it or put in a screw or something like that, and bone graft.
There is one more question. Are you advising MRI in all cases before the procedure?
I do an MRI in all cases for 2 reasons. One, a good MRI has got enough diagnostic accuracy to tell me that there is nothing majorly wrong in the knee, to confirm that the lateral cartilage is okay. But I do it also for this thing, academic purposes, meaning as to study them. But for the average, if someone doesn't want to do an MRI in a younger patient where only the medial cartilage is worn, 36-year-old, 40-year-old, 45-year-old, medial side is worn, doesn't have any symptoms, I don't think it's absolutely necessary to do an MRI.
Sir,
but I do it.
Sir, if a patient is having ligament deficiency, would you, with a normal slope, would you like to advocate for this Tomofix or this fixator?
As I said, if the patient is coming for pain, then I would, and the slope is normal, I would do it with a fixator. I have very good relationships with some of the arthroscopy surgeons in Mumbai. Some of them do in situations like that, they will do both together. But a couple of the more senior ones will get the osteotomy done, and then if the patient is older, mostly they don't come back, or they don't go back for an ACL. But now, yeah, go on.
So there is one other question by Dr. Dinesh Meena. He's working on this hybrid closed wedge osteotomy. So he's asking about that. Hybrid closed wedge.
That is described. That there's I forget the name. I think it's Nakajam. I forget the name. It's a combination, half closing, half opening. So that has been described. They say there are good results with it, but I have no personal experience with it.
So there is one more question. Dr. Imran from Gorakhpur is asking, what angulation is in orthofix you keep before fixing it to pins?
What angulation?
What angulation
Usually
in orthofix you keep before fixing it?
The orthofix has got a hinge. This one.
Okay.
See let me just show you this, because this is again a problem which people have. The orthofix fixator that we use see, this has a ball joint over here.
Yes, sir.
Here there is a ball joint. You see this one. So you can't just take a T, meaning you can't have sorry, not a ball joint. This has got a hinge. You can't take one with a ball joint and just fix it. So this, what we do is basically we put this more or less parallel to the joint. But important thing is it's pointing at or above the tip of the fibula. So I have enough space for my osteotomy to go up to there. And this pin is perpendicular. So there is no prefixed angle. We don't fix it. we first put, you saw me doing the osteotomy in that video. There's no fixator there. We have just used the fixator as a jig to put the pins in and then complete the osteotomy, and then finally we put the fixator on. So if you see the video which I have on YouTube, that whole process is explained pretty much in detail.
Dr. Puneet from Pune is asking what application to use in planning osteotomy. What application you are using in planning?
I use a thing called Bone Ninja on iPad, or I use a program called TraumaCAD. But you can use paper and pencil also. You get a printout, draw the lines, and you get the angle. You don't, because today everything is digital. All my X-rays are digital. So I plan it. You can use something like Horos, anything, any what they call it, PAX software will have the facility to draw lines and things like that.
So is there any other software which, because in many of our setups, we are not having that orthogram facility, scanogram facility. So is there any software to club the X-ray films to make?
Yeah. Shall I show it to you? I don't know whether I have it here. One sec. I don't have that example here, but if you look on YouTube and search for I think it's Osiris. It's called Osiris Stitching. That is there on YouTube in my channel. So youtube.com/Mangal Parihar, Osiris and Stitching. If you search for it, you will get that link.
Dr. Vimal want to ask something.
Yes.
Sir.
Hi, Vimal.
I'm a very ardent friend of yours. Friend or say disciple. You're my guru.
Yes.
And so far I've done around 37, 5 of them there. The first case you did with me was for me. She was 56-year-old lady. And bilateral, and you did bilateral first. 2005 was the first one, 2007 was the second one, and she is still going very strong. She is 71 now, so she's roaming around. So
and she's not going to require anything.
Yeah, what I'm asking you: have you had a chance to do a TKR on a patient who had a H2O first, and then how long? How many after how many years?
I have done it in one patient.
Yeah.
And that was after 15 years. And that patient was done very early on, and probably I have not done full sort of correction. Absolutely exact correction has not been done. And therefore, she was having pain, for which she has then undergone a replacement, which I have only done. There was one patient who has not got it done by me. She had it done somewhere else, and that was, I think, after about 12 years. Those are the only two patients that I know of. There may be others who have, been disappointed with me and not come back to me, and I don't know. But generally, I try to right now. Actually, my fellows are doing a follow-up of all our patients who are longer than 10 years. That's how this lady, which I showed the picture at 75, we are actively actually calling them and trying to find out what is their score, what is their X-ray, etc., etc. So I know of only 2 patients who have had. If there are others, I would have. There was a. You remember there was a doctor in ONGC in Dehradun.
Yes, it's Dr. Sharma.
Did he get it done or no?
Yeah, he got it done.
Yeah. So he got it done after how long?
Actually, he was not in touch with me, but I asked him once. I phoned him, and then I was told that he got it done, and that was pretty soon, maybe after 2-3 years or so. Maybe he was not satisfied, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I lost contact with him now. Dr. Sharma was the one.
Yeah.
And I think there was one more patient who had it done.
Who you did a knee replacement?
Yeah. Not me, but by somebody else.
Okay.
But yes, this lady was 16. Now you did my wife's also, and this is now 7 and nearly how many years now? It is 2007. So 13-14 years since then.
Yeah.
She is doing well.
So usually when I tell patients, I say 12 to 15 years is the number that I give, but I suspect that it is much longer.
Much longer.
Than that.
There are some few questions from the audience.
There are some questions on the chat also over here.
Yes. I am asking that. Dr. Ram is asking how often will you get pin track infection after STO, and when will you start weight bearing after using LRS?
Once or twice in the duration of the fixator, the posterior pins would get the proximal posterior pin, which is in fleshy tissue, and there's a lot of movement between the soft tissues and the pin. So there patients will have at least irritation. I would say about 50% of patients would get an infection which responds to antibiotics in that location. Once the pins are taken out, then there is no infection. I've had 2 patients who had infection after removal of the pins also. And those patients, after removal of the pins, we had to sort of scoop out the pin site, fill it up with the stimulant, antibiotic stimulant, and after that it has not recurred. But that's out of more than, I think 700 plus patients. So it's not a common thing. And when will you start weight bearing? We start weight bearing after the correction is complete. So once the limb is straight, then they start weight bearing using a walker, graduating over 2-3 weeks to a stick, and then nothing.
There is one other question, sir. Do you use patient-specific guides for slope correction along with STO?
Not as yet. Meaning, the guides will be good, but if you take an X-ray and measure it, that is good enough. So because the cut is made the same way for an opening wedge. You are making a cut, and then you have to do a differential opening. Normally, we say you should open the posterior more so that the slope doesn't change. So now you have to open the posterior even more to make it more trapezoidal, and then measure the articular surface of the tibia in relation to the long axis on a lateral X-ray. You can also see that the flexion deformity of the knee is straightening out. As you correct the slope, the flexion deformity will go away.
Sir, he's asking like H2O for failed ACL reconstruction where you want to decrease slope.
Sorry, what? Like HTO for failed ACL reconstruction where you want to decrease the slope. Oh, okay. No, but for failed ACL, you want to increase the slope. When it's ACL, you increase the slope. When it's PCL, you decrease the slope. So, but the answer is no. There is no. I'm not using cutting guides as yet, but it will come. They are being worked on, and cutting guides will come. But it's a very, very sort of niche area. It won't be this thing. Arthroscopist one is asking after major
Varus
varus
corrections.
correction.
Some patients complain
Some
of ankle
patients
pain.
complain of ankle pain. Yes, this may be in situations where patients have a little bit of valgus ankle. They are 40, 45, and then they start. They are in the early development of tibialis posterior syndrome, posterior tibial tendon syndrome. So that gets then exacerbated. I've had one patient who had that, but otherwise, if it's not a tibialis posterior syndrome, then that settles down over a period of time. They feel awkward that instead of the foot falling straight, the foot is falling a little on the medial side, etc. But over time, they get used to that, and that's one more reason why you shouldn't be overcorrecting. When you overcorrect, this will happen. Overcorrect in the sense of overcorrecting the tibia. But if you do appropriate correction in the femur and the tibia, then the chance of this valgus at the ankle happening is less.
Sir, there is one more question. Are you using any Indian implant in place of Tomofix for STU?
I have used the Pitkar one. I have used the Uma Surgical one.
How often you are doing bone grafting in such plates?
I never do. For a open wedge, I never do, unless in some situations like the this lady that I showed you at the end. I'm doing a closing wedge in the femur and an opening wedge in the tibia. So the wedge that I've taken out from the femur, instead of throwing it away, I put it into the tibia. But otherwise, as a matter of principle, if it's only an open wedge, I don't do a bone grafting because it's not needed. Patients are weight bearing within about 2-3 weeks, and there's huge literature which says that you don't need to fill it with a Tomofix. If you use a Pudu plate or something else, then it's a different issue.
Any other questions from the moderator and other faculty?
What is the maximum angle you can correct with the Orthofix? Or you will go for H2?
No, if you can correct, I think it depends. It's not so much the angle as how much distraction is required.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a large patient, the fixator stands further away, so it has less effect on the angle. So I ran into that problem once, where the patient had only come to the midline, but the distractor had got used up. I was at the end of the distractor. So what I did for that was I called Pitkar and I asked them to give me a male part with a longer longer male part. So then in the theater, I took the patient under anesthesia, put a sort of dummy on the pin, and then replaced that central portion. So I had another amount of distraction. I think in her case, it must have been about 30 mm is the standard. We had to use another 10-15 mm. So that's the only time that I have. But otherwise, you will not get, what's the classical tibia vara kind of thing. That's all of them are correctable by the fixator. And if it's a large amount, then I would correct it with something else.
Right. I had this similar problem once. So what I had to do was reposition the distal pins a little bit more proximal. This is what I did.
Yeah. Or yeah, I mean that is,
After
Yes,
Tomofix.
Dr. Pariyar.
yes.
Now you are using osteotomy in femur and tibia both,
Yes.
as and when required. but previously you were
Yes.
doing all the corrections in the tibia. So now you have experience of both, and of
Yes.
course the results also. So what difference you find that when you do a correction in femur and tibia both, and when you were doing only in tibia?
No, what has happened actually is I have done a few TBA where now when I go back and see, the joint line is a little oblique. But what has changed more importantly is a larger number of patients now fit into the indications, in the sense the subluxation, the severe virus. So when I started out, those were not patients that I was doing an osteotomy on. Those were patients where, you know, they wouldn't get an osteotomy. Now, those patients also get an osteotomy because I know that if I do a femoral correction also, then I will be able to shift it over well. So overall, I would say that it has only improved the results, because large amount of correction, suppose 7 degrees of deformities in the femur. So additional 7 degrees I had to correct in the tibia. Now, when you start stretching the tibia towards the end, it becomes a little painful also. Then your bone formation, etc., is a little problematic. It may take a little longer. So all of those things, if I consider, that's why I said that my threshold for doing a distal femoral osteotomy, even for 5 degrees, otherwise a person may think, यार 5 डिग्री के लिए क्या एक और incision मारना है. But that is so much beneficial that for me, even for 5 degrees, I will correct it. If it's more than 90 and patient has a lateral thrust, I will correct it back to normal.
Sir, for distal femur, you are not using LRS, you are using plate. Any specific reason?
The specific reason is there's a lot of muscle over there.
Okay.
And you can't, for the distal femur, anything you see, more than a opening wedge, it's always a closing wedge. Because that area is unlike the lateral portion of the tibia, which is kind of pliable and soft. In the femur, it's all cortical bone. So if you try to do, anyone who's tried, I have tried and I have broken open wedges, the hinge breaks. Even in closing wedges, it breaks sometimes. But because of a closing wedge, it is stable. So in principle, the anatomy doesn't lend itself to doing it. You have reflections of the synovium. So to get your pins into the femur, you run the risk of going intra-articular. And meaning we've done it years ago and in one case and regretted it. So it's not to be done.
One person in chat box is asking for titanium shanch pins, sir.
Titanium pins are supposed to reduce, improve the bonding with the bone and reduce the incidence of infection. To a certain extent, that is true. I use titanium pins for all my HTOs. I use titanium pins,
And
they're not terribly costly either.
okay. Dr. Priyar, you have been doing HTO with Elizarov also and LRS. So now,
Yeah.
when you would recommend to go for Elizarov, or is there any disadvantage by going with Elizarov?
No, to me, as the surgeon, I have to put in 4 pins and do an osteotomy. So I finish HTO in about 40 minutes. Then patient has only 4 pins to take care of. So less trouble for the patient in terms of, less trouble from the patient in terms of calling me up. आज ये पिन दुख रहा है, आज वो पिन दुख रहा है. and overall a stable situation, which means it will always heal. So for me, the orthofix, the hinged fixator unilateral is simpler to do. That's why I do it. I have no objection if someone does an Ilizarov, meaning ultimately it's going to be the, as I said, no, ऐसा नहीं है कि this is better or that is better. अगर आप angle, if you get the angle right, then your patient is going to have a good long-term result. So, but I will use the Ilizarov in situations where I have to correct the angulation in the sagittal, coronal, as well as say rotation, for example. There I will use the Ilizarov. Or say sometimes if there is a fracture and I don't want to put in a plate, I want to use a fixator only, then instead of a unilateral, I will convert it to an Ilizarov, because if the Ilizarov is there, the lateral hinge fracture does not matter, since the Ilizarov is giving us circumferential. But rare is the day when I have used the HTO. I used an Ilizarov for doing a HTO. Almost never. Only for rotational issues, I will.
Yeah. Dr. Pariyar, for Tomofix, do you use an oblique incision or a longitudinal incision?
No, I use a longitudinal incision.
So this probably uses a
which
oblique
is kind of
shorthand.
parallel to the crest. Yeah, I am not a big fan of very small incisions there. The distal portion, I try to do it through punches, but the proximal portion, I think the originators now recommend using that vertical incision,
Okay.
not the oblique incision which they used to talk of earlier.
Yeah. Do you remove plates regularly after the fracture?
No, only if the patient complains of it. Because even if, technically, if that patient ever has to go in for TKR in the future, it can be taken off at that time. Lesser number of procedures they have,
better,
the lesser is the chance of infection. So I would not, unless the patient complains of pain or irritation from the, which is about, I think they say about 20% complaint. Some question, in which cases will you change the tibial slope?
You already answered. Already
Yeah.
answered. There is no other question from the delegate. So, Dr. Sirohi, should we conclude the program? Sirohi, sir. Sirohi, sir.
Dr. Pariyar,
I think all the questions have been answered nicely. No more questions now?
No, not from my side.
Thank you, Dr. Pariyar.
so Dr. Pariyar, sir, can
Yes. Asking something?
I want to ask something. Just Dr. Pariyar is there.
Yes,
Yeah,
he's there.
I'm here.
Go on.
Sir,
I've missed your आवाज नहीं आ रहा आपका.
categorically you give certain number situations, sir, conditions when you will say cases to STO.
No, just
One
repeat
should
the
not
question. I
try.
didn't hear. I didn't hear it.
Absolute conditions where one should not try go for STO.
अभी भी नहीं सुना.
Hello.
टाइप कर लो अगर होता है तो.
Actually, I'm on mobile now.
हाँ,
Am
अभी
I
सुनाई
audible?
दे रहा है, बोलिए.
हाँ.
Yeah,
Absolute contraindications where you will indicate that one should not go for STO.
Rheumatoid arthritis is one. Older patient with extended indications, जो अभी मैं बोल रहा था, like the lady I showed you, that's the same kind of knee in a 70-year-old. I wouldn't do an HTO. That patient needs a TKR. And of course, bad tricompartmental arthritis, I wouldn't do HTO. Yeah, so they need a knee replacement.
So, sir, we are concluding the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank to Dr. Mangal Parihar, sir, on behalf of Uttarakhand Orthopedic Association. Thank you, sir. As we all are seeing these kind of cases in our day-to-day clinical practice, but we are passing time of patient with many drugs. So many drugs are in markets nowadays. But as you described, we are convinced, if we are convincing the patient and explain the benefit of this procedure, I think he will definitely get improved with this tactic without a lot of medicines. Thank you, sir, again. Thanks a lot. My special thanks to Dr. K.D. Tripathi, sir, Dr. Viman Naudiyal, sir, and Dr. Sanjay Dhawan, sir, moderating the session. And thanks to Dr. Singhal, sir, and Dr. Ashok Siroi, sir. And at last, thanks to Ortho TV, Dr. Ashok Sham, sir, Dr. Neeraj Islani, sir. And at last, thanks to all delegates who attended. Thank you, sir. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.